All right. Well, as I said, thank you all for joining us today. I do apologize for such short notice, not only for the chapter chat, but for the change of policies. And we'll go into a little bit of the background about that in just a moment here. But really want to thank you all for being so flexible with your schedules and your busy days to join us here this afternoon, as this is a rather important topic for all of us, chapter leaders, as well as the organization overall. So let's get started. As a partner, we felt that these policies were really important to have in place. Probably the most important is that they are going to protect you as individual chapter leaders from any personal liability, as well as the entire organization. Additionally, these policies ensure that we are very transparent with our members, as well as those companies or individuals that choose to donate to our organization. And perhaps the most important, or one of the most important, really all three of these, is that these policies ensure we are following the requirements of a 501c6 per IRS requirements and regulations. So that's a little bit of background why we've decided to put these policies in place. Do I have any questions at this time about the purpose for these policies? It's pretty straightforward, and we did allude to that in the email that we sent out earlier this morning as well, but certainly if you have any other questions, feel free to ask after the call next week, whenever they pop in your head. But we'll keep moving along for now. And again, as mentioned in my email this morning, the issue really stemmed from an email I received from a chapter leader over the summer. They were asking what was permissible as a fundraising activity. And this really led to a larger discussion and bigger question among staff here, as well as our auditor and our financial advisors. And that is, as a 501c6, how are we able to raise funds? So right now we're just going to take a step back and we're going to discuss the difference for those that don't know, and that difference between the 501c6 and 501c3. So first, let's start with the 501c6, which is what ANFP, as well as our chapters, that's how they're classified according to the IRS. That is our current tax exempt status. As a 501c6, our purpose is to improve an industry like the nutrition or food service industries. We are serving a specific industry that has a purpose or a niche. So it's a little bit more concentrated than some of the other broader organizations that we're going to cover in just a moment. Also, ANFP and our chapters rely on membership dues as our primary support. That doesn't mean that we don't have other support coming from other avenues such as corporate partners or sponsors, but membership dues are our primary source of revenue. And of course, while we receive donations, whether it's cash or gift, these donations are non-deductible for the donor per the IRS. However, if a chapter member were to donate or a chapter were to donate to our foundation or NFEF, this would be tax deductible as our foundation arm, which is a separate organization, though we're tied together, is a 501c3. So let's take that and let's compare it to a 501c3. Now the purpose of a 501c3 is to improve the public good. So that's an organization such as the American Red Cross, Catholic charities that are really working to improve or support the public. Their primary support comes from donations or contributions, whether it's from individuals, groups, or companies. Additionally, they can seek support in the form of grants. While ANFP or the chapters can seek grants, you'll need to read the fine print to find out if a 501c6, like our chapters, would be eligible for that grant. And of course, the most significant difference between a 501c6 and a 501c3 organization is that the contributions or donations made to a 501c3 are tax deductible and can be claimed as such in donors' tax returns to the IRS. So these are the major differences between the two classifications. We understand chapters need to raise funds, or they may need to raise funds for their meetings and other activities, but we always want to check with your state as terms of what is permissible. And chapters must always claim any funds raised on their 990. So anything you raise from any type of fundraising activity has to be included in your 990, which we're going to speak about in just a moment. So we don't want to necessarily name specifics about what you can and can't do, but there's some things that you're going to need to check with your state, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But you might want to consider some other possible ways, to cover those costs of your meetings. And that might be looking at a break-even cost. I know one of the values that our members find with their chapters is that their meeting costs are very reasonable, but it's just something to take another look at. We're not saying that you have to raise the cost, but we do expect that our chapters are being conscious about the cost that it is to run a meeting and what you may or may not need to do in order to cover those costs, whether that's raising the price of registration or perhaps soliciting sponsors for your meeting needs. But anyways, I digress. But I just wanted to give everybody some background about what our organization is and how that relates to fundraising or donors or contributions. So are there any questions about that? So I am getting some feedback, so I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone again. I do apologize for that. Again, if you don't have any questions during our opportunities to ask questions, I would just ask that you mute your phone so we don't have any of that feedback or background noise. And again, if you are on the visual or a webinar portion of the program, feel free to use the chat function. Okay, let's keep moving on. So let's take a look now how these new policies are tied to these IRS classifications. Due to chapter leaders and volunteers being held personally liable for not having a permit for the correct fundraising activities, we are discouraging chapters from hosting or conducting such events to do with charitable gaming. And charitable gaming can include raffles, pull tabs, bingo or casino night, or really any other games of chance, as they are considered gambling in many states. Now, I understand that many of our chapters hold raffles. However, your state may hold you as an individual accountable if the proper documentation is not secured or filed for that type of activity. They can be held personally liable for knowingly participating in a charitable gaming activity without a license, which could result in criminal or civil penalties, including being charged with a misdemeanor or fines up to $50,000. So there really is a real risk here if we're not properly obtaining the right permits or licenses needed. And this is going to depend on your state and their requirements, which varies from state to state. We certainly don't want to see anyone held personally liable for not going through the proper channels to obtain those licenses. So something definitely to keep in mind as you have your fall meetings approaching. And with that being said, please, again, check your state's Department of Revenue or your comptroller's website. Search for charitable gaming. It's usually pretty easy to find. And look for those requirements as well as the deadlines that are attached to some of those requirements. It may depend on your state. Some ask for 2 weeks. Some may ask for 30 days. So again, you're really going to need to look into that. And you might want to look into your local government. Some counties may require you to have the correct license or permit for charitable gaming. So be sure you're looking at that as well, depending on when your meeting is where your meeting is being held. Now, I know we have a number of chapters that have fall meetings approaching, and that's why I want to implement these policies as soon as possible. Most of these applications are simple process. They might require a small fee, but I would encourage you to look into the charitable gaming requirements as soon as possible. Again, this policy is really in place to protect our chapter leaders and ensure that we're compliant with local and state regulations. So let me go ahead and open it up again to questions. Again, if you have some background noise or feedback going on, please go ahead and mute yourself unless you have a question. But do I have any questions at this time? And certainly if questions arise when you're in the process of filing for a license or a permit for charitable gaming, give me a call. I will do my best to walk you through your state's process or help explain maybe some of that language that's in there. But, you know, if you have questions after this call, certainly follow up with me as well. We're going to go ahead and keep moving on. Now, if you plan on holding a charitable gaming activity, which we know that, you know, raffles are a big draw, there's something exciting, I know your members get excited about, again, There's going to be some new things that are going to be required with that. For starters, all chapters will need to notify National of any planned charitable gaming activity and provide proof of the gaming license, permit, and/or registration dependent on your state's requirements, and this needs to be done prior to the date of the planned activity. If it's not a requirement in your state, which those may be non-existent or at least far and few in between, we ask that you please send us the link which states that there are no requirements, so we have a very good understanding of that whole process within your state. Either way, this information should all be submitted to the chapter's email address, and again, prior to when the activity will be taking place. Okay, so just a few reminders there. Next, we're going to ask chapters to include a statement of their fundraising or their donation forms disclosing ANFP's tax-exempt classification, and explains that ANFP chapters are established as a 501c6 organization and they're not charitable organizations. This ensures we are totally transparent with our donors and they are fully aware of our tax-exempt status. This will also ensure that they report their donations or contributions on their own filings correctly. So the disclaimer, if you're on the visual portion of the program, you see it here. If not, we'll be sending up a follow-up email following the phone call with the information needed. But the disclaimer should state, no funds paid or gifts donated to an ANFP chapter may be deducted as a charitable contribution for federal income tax purposes. How they claim it will have to be up to them. Most of them might have to claim it as a business expense. Again, we're not going to get into details on their returns. We're just really worried about being very open and honest and transparent about our exact tax-exempt status. Again, you can put this on your donation forms. It should probably also be displayed near the planned fundraising activity. So if you have a raffle basket, make sure you print out this disclaimer, put it there, and just make sure our donors are really fully aware of our 501c6 status. Any questions about that? No? Okay, let's keep moving along here. Next, we're asking for chapters to be sure that they are claiming these funds on their 990s. Whether it's fund raised by raffles, bingo, bake sale, or any other means, they need to be reported within the 990 as part of the chapter's revenue. Additionally, we are now asking chapters to disclose the total funds raised in a year-end summary submitted to National. Putting together a year-end summary should already be part of your financial best practices. So really, this should just be simply attaching a document and sending it to National. We don't have access to our chapter's full filings. We only have proof that you filed them. So we do want to be sure we're filing accurately, because as we discussed earlier, there are consequences for not claiming funds or not filing the proper documentation. So hopefully this doesn't burden anymore with anyone with any further work. Again, we are supposed to be doing year-end summaries for the board to be reviewing and your finance committees to be reviewing as well. As we just mentioned, consequences are related to unreported funds. Any person who files a fraudulent return or even fails to disclose the donations from charitable gaming or other fundraising activities can face felony charges. So it would be a federal offense if he were to be audited and this were to come about. So again, we just want to reiterate these policies are in place for your own protection as chapter leaders. But then, of course, we also want to be sure we're complying with these IRS requirements so we don't face those kinds of consequences. And I do believe that most of our chapters are already reporting this 990. So this is really more of a reminder to know that, this has to be included in your 990. And again, then we're just asking for that year-end summary to be reported back to National headquarters here. Now, if you just want to bear with me for one moment, I do believe we had a couple questions come through here on chat. Does the year-end summary need to be by calendar year or fiscal year? We would prefer that it be by the ANFP fiscal year, which is June 1st through May 31st. As you know, we have really wanted to see our chapters follow our own fiscal year for these kinds of reasons. So we would ask that that is returned to us by May 31st. Great question. And let me see here, we've got a couple more. Are the tax forms maintained by the Finance Committee? So the Finance Committee is really more of an oversight committee. The treasurer is responsible for all financial aspects of the chapter. And of course, there should be some other authorizations and approvals going on with the president as well. So the Finance Committee should not be putting this form together, but they should be reviewing it before it comes to national to ensure that, you know, we're in compliance with your own policies and procedures and your own financial best practices, and of course, just sound accounting practices overall. Great question. Let's see if we have any more here. We need to just include the total all funds. Yes, they do not need to be itemized. We're not asking for it at this point. You know, I would hope that most of our chapters are putting together some sort of year-end financial summary. And within that, that's where you would also want to include your funds raised, as you should already be doing, again, as I had mentioned. Great. Any other questions? I can unmute the phones here, see if we have any more. Any other questions at this time?
I have a question.
Yes. Go ahead.
How often should the Finance Committee provide that oversight? I mean, I know it's twice a year that the Finance Committee provides oversight, but when should they start looking at it? Is it in particular times of the year?
I would actually recommend that Finance Committees be meeting at least quarterly, and they should be reviewing the chapter finances, you know, bank statements, any other summaries, monthly summaries that are put together. And that, you know, that can really be done via phone as long as everybody has the proper documentation in front of them. So I would actually recommend making that a quarterly practice. So then by the time the year-end summary is needed by national, you know, that should be ready to go. There shouldn't be a lot of work because it's been done and approved by the Finance Committee if necessary. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Oh, okay, let's keep rolling here. All right, so our last policy is related to grants, which can be another way for our chapters to raise funds if they feel that that's needed. If your chapter is applying for a grant, whether it's private, federal, or state, you'll want to be sure to inquire with your donor on their policy regarding applicant requirements and ensure that your chapter is eligible for that grant as a 501c6. There are a few out there. They're not as common as they are for the 501c3. So check in with the donor, you know, and disclose that you are a 501c6 organization, because if you find out you've gone through the entire grant application process, which if you've gone through a process like that, you understand it is very time consuming, it can be very tedious, and there's a lot of work often that goes with that. You know, and come to find out that you're not even eligible as a 501c6. It's really just kind of a waste of everybody's time. So make sure you're disclosing that information to your donor ahead of the grant application process. Okay, so that really pretty much sums it up, but I really just want to take this moment to reiterate these policies are certainly not in place to punish our chapters or our chapter leaders or to make your lives or fundraising any more difficult. Again, they've been put into place for your protection as a chapter leader, as well as for ANFP as an entire organization, and of course that we are always remaining as transparent as we can be, either as a recipient of donations or as donors ourselves. So just really want to make sure that everybody understands that. And again, I want to open up the floor one more time if there's any more questions about the policies.
Are you able to just recap kind of the steps? As you were saying, we know we have to report it. We know we have to report it on the 990. You're saying that we have to, when we have meetings now we have to display some type of signage saying that it's a 501. And so forth. I'm saying, just can you kind of go just down the steps of the things that, you know, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the things we actually need to have in place.
Sure. Great question. So first and foremost is that if you are planning on holding a charitable gaming activity, you need to check with the state's Department of Revenue or Comptroller's website or call them, inquire about what the requirements are. You may find in some cases that as a 501c6, you may not be eligible to hold that type of activity. And that is per the state requirements. And we want to be sensitive about that and, of course, follow those requirements as the state is instructing us to. So that's first and foremost, is get your information, understand what you need to hold that activity, and then, of course, if you are able to understand that application or registration that you need, as well as the fee for that. Secondly, once you do find, if you are eligible to hold that charitable gaming activity, that you want to be sure that you're disclosing that ANFP chapters are not a 501c6 organization. So while they may be purchasing a raffle ticket, which is technically a donation, they will not be able to write off that expense. And that is because it is a non-tax deductible expense. So we want to be sure that we have that disclaimer either on a donation form if they're completing that, or displayed somewhere very prominently so they understand very clearly that we are a 501c6 organization and their donations are non-tax deductible. Following that, once you hold your fundraising activity, you want to be sure that you're including this on your 990 when you report that annually as part of your revenue. And then we are asking that chapters provide this information in their year-end summary as well, and that can be provided to National by the end of May. That pretty much sums up in terms of the charitable gaming or the fundraising portion of it. Then, of course, grants. If you do find that you want to apply for a grant, you want to check the eligibility requirements and if a 501c6 is even eligible for that type of grant. If not, I would even take it a step further. If that information can't be found, is to inquire with the donor. Ask them if 501c6 are eligible, or let them know ahead of time before you go through that process. And I will send out an email following this call to summarize all of these as well. And then these policies are also going to be implemented into the volunteer handbook, so we'll have an updated version out on ANFP Connect available later this week or early next week with these new policies as well. Great question, though. Anyone else have any other questions?
This is our webinar thing that we had to go over about our 501 and fundraising.
Does anybody have any other questions? I'm getting some feedback, background noise. Okay, well, and if you find that you have questions following this phone call, you know, like I said, as you're going through the process yourself with your state and at that application process, certainly feel free to reach out to me. I will guide you through that process best that I can, or if not, direct you to someone who can. But again, just really want to reiterate that, you know, these policies are here for everyone's protection, and we're here as your partner to make sure that we're IRS compliant and state compliant with these type of regulations. All right. Well, thank you everyone so much again for joining us very last minute. And I hope to see or hear from many of you on next week's call on Tuesday, August 21st at 2 p.m. Central Time. And we'll be discussing how to build a better board. Thank you everyone and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.